Coogs House. Or should we start saying Casa de Coogs? A ton of fun information coming out of the Big 12 today, including more stuff about who could be coming in soon. Let's jump on in.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who came to step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you get the latest on the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. It is good to see you again. Remember, doing a giveaway every 250 subscribers. We're like more or less at 250, so just go ahead and hit the subscriber button so we can get something out to someone giving a hat just like this one I got on right here. So like and comment on the video as well to let us know you're entered if, after talking about some big Big 12 news and how that pertains to the University of Houston specifically, you are kind of Big 12'd out or don't know what to say or just in shock, sure, about some of these takes right here in a second. Tell us down below if you like green salsa or red salsa more. Now, a couple things here. One, we're going to talk first about the news of the day, the Big 12 news of the day, being that, between the salsa question or the opening or whatever, I'm sure you can already guess. And then I guess there's this thing next to me. So, maybe that too. We'll also talk something about who could be about to join the Big 12 and who would be the best get for Houston and who would be the worst get for Houston in a number of different things. Before we get too far into all that and who could be coming and those kinds of things, I do want to start off, though, with talking about Mexico. So the newest information coming out, confirmed by, so Duarte reported this, I guess it's been a month ago at this point, that this was on the horizon. Houston Chronicle, that is, I guess, reported this on the horizon. But the Big 12 confirmed on Thursday morning that early reports of Houston playing Kansas in Mexico City for basketball, both men's and women's, it looks like, as early as this December, feels like a lock. It looks like that will be happening in December of 2023. Couple different things there that are really interesting about that. One, playing a conference game in December from a more like logistical scheduling standpoint is interesting. But two, this is an interesting push and change. Houston is being paired up with, on the men's side of this, a traditional blue blood program when I don't know that you and I both know that Houston is a blue blood in their own right. 6 Final Fours, history dating back for a long time from Elvin Hayes, Faisal Majama, and now Kelvin Sampson, and so on. But at a national level, right, Kansas is the bluest of the blue bloods, and so getting to play them and being the team put on exhibition with them is an interesting look. I think it tells us a lot about what Brett Yormark and the Big 12 think about Sampson and Houston and the Houston basketball program. We also know that Brett Yormark has a knack for basketball from his time with the Brooklyn Nets, his ties to Jay-Z and all that Rock Nation stuff, but also he's been very vocal about college basketball being an underappreciated, valuable asset across college sports. So that game is happening this December. We don't have a date on it yet outside of the fact that it's December, but it's interesting that it's December because the scheduling thing, when these schedules come out, the scheduling conflict will be that conference games typically start in January. And so does this count as a conference game for Houston? And are you opening Big 12 conference play with the, 2021 national champion and the team that won, they won the conference almost the entire 21st century, it feels like, either the regular season or the tournament, and opening Big 12 play by playing the best of the Big 12 at a neutral site. And if it's a neutral site, does that mean Houston loses a home game, or does that mean Kansas loses a home game, right, in the series? That will be an interesting thing to look at and pay attention to. I'm excited about it because that is, I can't wait to see Houston play Kansas for a number of reasons, but getting to see them play in an exhibition style like this, where not exhibition like doesn't count, but where it's they're on exhibition, they're the premier thing happening. And again, the United States is offering this as like, hey, look at this product, look at this university, look at these schools, look at these programs, et cetera, in the United States, just on the other side of that border. We also got wind on Thursday morning that there is a push by the Big 12 to have a bowl game in Monterey and the postseason that follows the 2026 season. And it would, I guess, technically not be the first international bowl game. Worth pointing out that the Bahamas Bowl is played in Nassau. So, like that is very close, but international. And I guess before the Cuban Revolution, in the earliest days of college football, there was occasionally a Bacardi Bowl in Havana, which again is like, what is it, 30 miles from that from Key West. So like, those kinds of things. I guess Toronto also, someone informed me, had a bowl game until like 2010. So this is not the first international bowl game, but certainly the first being added in a long time. And Brett Yormark is making this very clear that he wants to be a Big 12 bowl game where at least one of the competitors in it are a Big 12 team, because he wants the Big 12 through these Mexico trips in both football and basketball to continue to be, again, the reports are, a unique experience and conference. He thinks that these are ways that you can make the conference stick out from your SECs of the world or your Big Tens of the world, or even if the ACC and Pac-12 are still around, your ACC and Pac-12s of the world, because you're offering student athletes and programs chances to do things like basketball teams take international trips in their off season. Houston's doing one this fall, right? I think it's in August. But those are off-season trips scheduled by the schools, and they play some semi-pro teams or whatever to kind of get some practice reps in, but more or less it's an experience, right? This is a thing that the Big 12 alone would do in playing these basketball and bowl games across the border, because it is a unique experience on top of that. So like, sure, Vanderbilt will go play basketball games in August in Rome or whatever, but that's not exactly the same when you think about those being like scheduled trips and like once every 4 years and so on. Like, this is a Big 12 thing, and it's going to be a hostile competitive environment. It's going to be not unlike the NFL playing games in Europe. The NFL now has 4 or 5 games in Europe every year, right? As the NFL is like looking to expand their market, the Big 12 is kind of doing the same. I don't think we'll ever get to the point where we're adding teams from Mexico, but you're expanding the television audience, you're expanding the reach of the conference. And we talked about going coast to coast, east to west. We didn't talk about going that far south. We talked about how this national conference could go. It's interesting to see the financial vision of that. Plus, basketball specifically is the second most watched sport in the country of Mexico. And football is American football is a rapidly growing sport in the country of Mexico. And offering the Big 12 version of those things to Mexico is interesting in that it's like, here's a taste of what we do, here's exposure. And who knows if you end up signing some great basketball recruit out of Mexico in like 2035 because you played a game there when he was 6 in 2023, or I guess that's probably not how the math works out, but you got me on that, right? Like, theoretically, this could pay dividends later, especially, and this will be where I wrap up the Mexico stuff, but on Houston's front. Houston and the state of Texas obviously borders Mexico. It stands to reason that they would gain more from building a relationship with that country than other states in this conference. I guess if Arizona gets added or something, or whatever, but so the Texas schools will benefit some, and Houston specifically, while it's, I guess, not closer to the border than Waco or anything like that, Houston specifically is such an international city with such diversity all around it that the intrigue in the University of Houston will already be there. It doesn't have to be manufactured, it doesn't have to be forced, it doesn't have to be, there's no like extra stuff to make people from Mexico interested in the University of Houston. And so getting that pull will be huge for Houston in a way that, like, I don't think Ames, Iowa will have. And so I think this is a big, big deal for Houston specific. Obviously, a huge deal for the conference, but for Houston specifically, any and all positive things to come out of this, I feel like only get doubled for Houston relative to the rest of the schools in the conference. And I would bet on that being kind of part of the reason that Houston's in this first exhibition basketball game going down. I keep saying that because I think of it as like put on a platter, but this first basketball game happening in December. Speaking of bets, let's talk about our buddies at FanDuel because it is time for the NBA Finals. It's time to make a fast break during those NBA Finals to FanDuel because right now new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. I know at this point you're probably thinking I'm just going to fade Parker on whatever he says because he's been fairly wrong on a lot of these NBA Finals bets. But in Game 4, right, Denver won Game 3 of the NBA Finals, kind of running away. Two different guys had triple-doubles. It was the first time in NBA history 2 guys on the same team had 30-point triple-doubles, right? But worth pointing out that in Game 4, Denver is favored by 3.5 points. We haven't seen Miami have back-to-back dud games, really. Even in the Boston series where they lost 3 in a row, they didn't have dud games. They kept those games close. Remember, like the Derek White fingertips from heaven or whatever, right? Like their games were close in that series. And so I'm thinking that Miami keeps it under 3.5, even in a loss. And so I'm going to take Miami at plus 3.5, and I'm going to do it at FanDuel because right now at FanDuel, you can get a no sweat first bet of $2,500 with code locked on. So you visit FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right. I know that people, have been talking about the Big 12 and expansion a lot, and there's been a lot of names thrown around. And frankly, as of Wednesday night, June 7th, / into the wee hours of Thursday morning, there were reports from Swaim and a handful of other folks out there that it looks like the Big 12 could very well be about to get those schools because the Pac-12 offer sheet may be as low as $19 million from their TV deals. And people are talking about the GOR that they were signing, the guarantee of rights. And I guess what that's agreeing to, the guarantee of rights that people are agreeing to in that is that they're guaranteeing that it, without seeing the number, sure, we can agree in principle to being over there for the right deal. That's no problem, right? That's all they're saying. The guarantee of rights that the ACC signed a little different because they signed it having known the TV dollar numbers. Without knowing the TV dollar numbers, all of these Pac-12 schools could easily opt out because they'll just say, well, you didn't have all the information in front of us and blah, 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 right? It looks like they're going to be closer to $20 million than $30 million, and the Big 12 we know is offering $31.7 per school. Stands to reason that someone in the Pac-12 would jump ship to get to the Big 12 in the near future, if that is indeed the case. And looking at the remaining 10 Big 12 or the remaining 10 Pac-12 schools, I have made a little bit of a list of schools that I think would be best for Houston to see added. I've got a best and I've got a worst, and frankly, they're not that far apart. So let's talk a little bit about first who I think the best would be, and then I'll work my way down that way towards the worst. The best school, I think, from the Pac-12 that Houston could add is Arizona. Now, understandably, this is admitting that USC and UCLA are one of the Big Ten, and if those were available options, that'd be a whole different deal. But the next best school, I think, is Arizona because it's very much put out as a university that they're going to make the financial decision. So, this is very, very possible. It wouldn't be a very big reach to go get them. The president of the university said that on, I think the quote came out Wednesday night where he's like, look, we're making this decision financially, whatever makes the most sense. And if you think about Arizona, they travel to Northern California, Washington, Oregon. That's just going north, the same amount of miles they would head east if they came to Lubbock, Houston, Waco, etc. Right? So that's, and I guess technically Utah is actually not even as far. So that's one thing to keep in mind here. I think what's interesting here is first, they have broken away from Arizona State in terms of any sort of requirement to move together. They just have to be on the same page. So Arizona can come to the Big 12 with a Colorado or with a Utah or with a Cal or whomever and leave Arizona State behind. You don't have to take on Arizona State with Arizona. Pairing with Colorado would be interesting. It adds 2 new states, the footprint. They're both Pac-12 states, but you're pulling in both groups of guys. I think the interesting thing is Arizona would come into the Big 12, but probably not lean on the Big 12 footprint, the current footprint, mainly Texas, for recruiting purposes in the same way that a Colorado would. Currently, the university is about a 6 or 7 hour from prime Southern California recruiting real estate. And I say that kind of depends on how far north and south you call prime real estate, if it's the outskirts of Los Angeles or San Diego or inland or whatever. But they're very close. I think it's worth pointing out to all of that. They also would be offering a very unique a unique experience to all those kids, not just Big 12 stuff in Mexico we talked about, but all the Southern California kids, if you are paying attention, are about to have to pick a conference in which they're going to travel far from home for games. USC and UCLA may be in the heart of Los Angeles, but every single conference game except for the other one in that pair is going to be in the Midwest, right? And so Arizona can realistically recruit those kids and be like, look, yes, you got to travel to come to our games, and yes, we're going to be playing a lot of games in Texas, but like it's better than playing in Ann Arbor, right? Like those kinds of things I think are on the table there. Financially speaking, Arizona had $125 million in revenue last year. Both football and men's basketball were pulling in nearly double of what they spent as athletic programs go. Having both of those programs be financially independent, I think, is very, very key in the math here, especially with what Bert Yormark has talked about with potentially having a basketball-only deal for media rights in 2030, that the Arizona basketball program alone can stand alone, and the football program, obviously, revenue is what it does. Most schools, you'll see the football program pull in some amount more money than they spend because that gap ends up paying for a lot of other athletic programs. But that the men's basketball program does as well at Arizona is really, really key for why they're a great financial ad. My honorable mention here would be Oregon. Phil Knight, Nike money, they pull in more money than anybody, right? I think they revenued 153 and change million last year. Football does make nearly double what they spend, and basketball is just slightly over even. I think there's a lot of things about Oregon that are interesting to bring in the conference. It's been the college football playoff. It's kind of a national brand. The one hesitation I have versus Arizona is that recruiting bit. Arizona recruits Southern California, Arizona, and Nevada very, very well, and wouldn't need to dip their toes into Texas from that front. Oregon, since Chip Kelly left, and even a little bit while he was there, kind of already does. They use the Nike school, the hip school, the trendy school, the new uniforms every week, and all those kinds of things to pull in kids from all over the country. And you and I both know that with Texas being the crazy fertile recruiting ground that it is, they pull in Texas kids as much as anybody that is not from a Texas adjacent state, right? Or Texas itself, obviously, right? That's my hesitation there, is it'd be potentially a way for them to get into a conference that has several schools in Texas and get more of a foothold here and stealing recruits. But financially, makes a ton of sense. The Phil Knight connection should not be lost. I think that's a really, really important ad. I just see Arizona as being while they make $30 million less dollars in revenues, I think Arizona has this same benefits to Houston specifically without losing potential recruits to them. Obviously, high on this list also I have Colorado. My deal with Colorado not being quite as high as Oregon or Arizona is I think they're crazy valuable while Dion is there, and I don't know how valuable they are after Dion leaves to Houston specifically. I also think Dion is going to use this to get his Texas recruits. Everyone knows he has ties all over Texas, and stealing Texas recruits has kind of already been his thing. And so I wonder if Dion, only being there a couple of years and then moving to Florida State, he then would take those recruit trips with him, having built those relationships and continue to build those relationships. But realistically, Colorado would be who we're left with, not Dion. And is Colorado the same dance partner without Dion there, right? So that's why I feel like they're probably third on my list. And then UConn, I actually have fourth. I know some people are really opposed to the idea of adding a full UConn. UConn could only be added as a full member if they invested in football. And if they really invest the money in football, and per the revenue stats they do, or they have the money to do it, if they really were to go down that route, I don't see why they wouldn't be a good ad. It'd be a win in football every year because even with the money put in, it's going to take a while to build up that program. And B, we know that the 2030 deal for the media rights deal is going to be there's going to be a basketball specific thing, and UConn has 5 national titles in basketball since 1999, and is a really strong program with a bunch of different coaches coming through. So it's clearly like a program thing, not a single coach thing. And frankly, Houston's a great basketball power and program in its own right, and frankly, and having that brand in the same group would be nice. I just don't see as many drawbacks. I also see UConn's way to get into the New York market. It's about 2 hours away, and so you're looking at, I guess, the university close to 3, and so then you have people commuting that live in that whole wide swath in between. UConn's a great way to get to New York, and I think that's, from a media perspective, going to be important in the next few years. And so playing games in Madison Square Garden would be nice. That's my best ads potentially. I know UConn is not in the Pac-12, but those are my best ads. Let's jump into the third segment, though, and talk about the schools I don't want to see added. So the schools I really don't want to see added, I came down to 3, but one stuck out as much worse than the other 3. And the funny thing is that it's a school that might get added, and that's unfortunate here, right? Arizona State is a school I least would like to see added to the Big 12. And I get that it is technically closer to Southern California than Arizona was, and Arizona was my favorite to add for Houston. But for Houston, while Arizona State is technically closer to Southern California, it does its own recruiting nationally. It pulls in kids from all over the country. And it's not quite the same blue blood program as a Stanford or I guess not Stanford in the same kind of sense, but as a USC or UCLA. But in recruiting nationally, I feel like they could really, really feed off of being in Texas and stealing Texas recruits. The Herm Edwards turnaround failure there kind of scares me. It could be a while that program has flipped back around to being a positive win total football program, and football drives the dollars for all these things, right? In the last 20 years, they're just under 500 as far as their football program goes, and just half of those 20 seasons were seasons above 500. So, it's been very much a mediocre program at best, while in the Pac-12 the last 20 years, kind of a regular team in like the Holiday Bowl or Sun Bowl. And I just think that Houston would like to play better competition than that. And then I also think the Big 12 can add better competition than that. Meanwhile, on the financial side of things, they do add $121 million in revenue for their own school. And while it's not in the red, the football program is not quite double what they're not quite pulling in double what they spend, which means that many of their other programs do function in the red. Whereas like Arizona, football and basketball were both programs made twice as much money as they spent, right? And were very much standalone kind of programs. That's not the case at Arizona State. And I, again, if you're having to pull that much money, you don't have as much money to pull out of from football because they spend a lot bigger chunk of their budget already on it, and then they're having to distribute across other sports that aren't making as much worth themselves. I don't see the growth long term in those programs that I might see at other schools. Now, the other 2 honorable mentions I have in my worst ads, we'll start with Cal. Cal has some of the low revenues of all the public schools within the Pac-12 conference, and $118 million. The big difference between them and Arizona State, frankly, and let's just cut to the chase here, is that they do get you to California, right? They do get you coast to coast. They do get you to the Bay Area at that. And I think that's a valuable thing to remember, that if you're looking at markets, if you're looking at expansion, if you're looking at growth, adding the state of California adds a level of value that adding Arizona does not. And it's not that I think that puts Cal over the University of Arizona in my head. And there's a lot of other positives to Arizona as an athletic department for Houston and for the Big 12 that Cal doesn't have. But that does change it from Arizona State to me. That does kind of make the difference there. You can tell a Bay Area and Northern California kid on your recruiting trip, look, we'll be here every other year. You could theoretically have basketball programs, and we're playing in Mexico City and Cal and Arizona both. Both of these states do border Mexico, obviously, but there's a large population in California, I think, that would be into basketball in Mexico. It's a basketball-related area. The Bay Area is. So I think all those things lead me to think that like that's a better fit. Similarly, my next pick would have been Stanford. Now Stanford has the same perks that Cal has. They don't report their revenues in the same public forum because it's a private school. They're not required to. So finding that's a little bit more challenging. But the deal here to me is the Cal and Stanford both, but Stanford especially, will not bend academics for sports, and that inevitably caps their programs. Right? There's only so far you can go if you have like a more limited pool on who your athletes are. Right? The deal to me that's different between Cal and Stanford is Stanford has somehow still found athletes in the past. I mean, they had Christian McCaffrey and Toby Gerhart playing running backs. Ty Montgomery was a wide receiver. Came through and running back, I guess, that came through there. They had a bunch of tight ends come through, like too long a list to list right now, but a bunch of pro tight ends have come through that football program. It's once in a blue moon. They had Andrew Luck. They had John Elway. Long before that, they had Jim Plunkett. Like, they've had quarterbacks come through too. You can a little bit more headier, brainier kind of guy come through and play quarterback, cerebral kind of guy. And so it gets you into California. It's got a football program that might be a little bit more promising. I think the thing that's sneaky with Stanford that people might not realize unless you know athletes that went there is they're a sneaky Nike school. They don't have the flash and the gaud of Oregon. They don't do uniforms every week, but the quality of stuff, the big selling point for them for recruits versus Duke or Northwestern or whatever, amongst those academic schools that are at that level academically, is that they, the place that Phil Knight got his master's, have also a similar relationship as Oregon to Nike, in that they get the top end, highest quality, brand new every year and brand new every week, and they get whatever they want in terms of Nike stuff. They just don't get the gaudy colors, the light colors, the bright colors, the new uniforms every week, or the new looking uniforms every week. They have a very classy, classic look. And so while their numbers and finances aren't reported in the same way that Oregon's are, I would imagine that with that kind of a relationship with Phil Knight, they're also very high. I remember in the early 2000s, Sports Illustrated put something out that had them as like the top money-making institution in all of college sports, because when you think about how much money they make in all those other like water polo-y, like tertiary type of sports that a lot of schools don't even have, and then the Phil Knight thing and all the kind of things put together, right? Stanford is low on my list from a number of different reasons, but certainly not the lowest. I'm sticking with Arizona State's lowest. Tell me down below who your favorite ad or least favorite ad would be to the Big 12 Conference. You can find me at Painsworth512. That's PAINSWORTH 512 on Twitter, Instagram, and all of your favorite social media handles. I'll be able to talk all things Cougs, Big 12, Mexico. I've been Mexico twice, I guess. So all things like that. Also Rockets, Astros, Texans, all those kinds of things. Thank you all so much for listening today and making us your first listen. I'm going to recommend Locked On College Basketball, talking about all things draft coming around and transfer portals and all that, as well. So make sure you give them a listen. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.